Well, hello there, Space Monkeys. Welcome to Political Fight Club. I'm Robert Durden. In this episode, we're going to read the second half of the first chapter of Blackshirts and Reds. And this is called Rational Fascism. We're going to start on page 11, The Rational Use of Irrational Ideology. And what this second half is about is a little bit more on Nazi ideology, but particularly the last part of it is important about how fascism and corporatism, or the relationship between big business and fascism, is always the one to form rather than big business ever getting behind communism. So that's interesting, and you have to understand why that is to understand why it's so important to not be you really can't be a true socialist and still want capitalist in the system, because the more capitalism you allow into an economic system, it will necessarily breed more fascism. And understanding how that happens, both historically and how what's happening right now, is important. So this is Michael Parenti's Blackshirts and Reds, page 11. Some writers stress the irrational features of fascism. By doing so, they overlook the rational politico-economic functions that fascism performed. Much of politics is the rational manipulation of irrational symbols. Certainly this is true of fascist ideology, whose emotive appeals have served a class control function. First there was the cult of the leader in Italy, Il Duce in Germany, and Der Führerprinzip. With leader worship there came an idolatry of the state. As Mussolini wrote, quote, "The fascist conception of life stresses the importance of the state and accepts the individual only insofar as his interests coincide with those of the state." Fascism preaches the authoritarian rule of an all-encompassing state and a supreme leader. It extols the harsher human impulses of conquest and domination, while rejecting egalitarianism, democracy, collectivism, and pacifism as doctrines of weakness and decadence. Now, the Democrats are in power right now, and that's how their supreme leader, whether now it's Biden, but if it had been Clinton, it would have been the same thing. It was with Clinton before. All of these things happen under both right-wingers and left-wingers in the United States, so just make note of that. A dedication to peace, Mussolini wrote, quote, is hostile to fascism. Again, Biden's keeping up all of the wars that Trump was doing and now starting another one. Perpetual peace, as he claimed in 1934, is a depressing doctrine. Only in a cruel struggle and conquest do men or nations achieve their highest realization. Though words are beautiful things, he asserted, rifles, machine guns, planes, and cannons are still more beautiful. And on another occasion he wrote, "War alone puts the stamp of nobility upon the peoples who have the courage to meet it." Ironically, most Italian army conscripts had no stomach for Mussolini's wars, tending to remove themselves from battle once they discovered that the other side was using live ammunition. Fascist doctrine stresses monoistic values, ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer, one people, one rule, one leader. The people are no longer to be concerned with class divisions, but must see themselves as part of a harmonious whole, rich and poor as one, a view that supports the economic status quo by cloaking the ongoing system of class exploitation. This is in contrast to a left agenda that advocates the articulation of popular demands and a sharpened awareness of social injustice and class struggle. This monism is buttressed by atavistic appeals to the mythical roots of the people. For Mussolini, it was the grandeur that was Rome. For Hitler, the ancient Volk. A play written by a pro-Nazi Hans Jost entitled Schlagetter and performed widely throughout Germany soon after the Nazis seized power, Hitler attended the opening night in Berlin, pits Volk mysticism against class politics. The enthusiastic August is talking to his father, Schneider. August says, "You won't believe it, Papa, but the young people don't pay much attention to these old slogans anymore. The class struggle is dying out." Schneider, his father, "So? And what do you have then?" August says, "The Volk community." Schneider, "And that's a slogan?" August, "No, it's an experience." Schneider, "My God, our class struggle, our strikes, they weren't an experience, eh? Socialism, the International, they were fantasies maybe." August says, "They were necessary, but they are historical experiences." Schneider responds, "So, and the future, therefore, will have your Volk community. Tell me how you do actually envision this. Poor, rich, healthy, upper, lower, all this ceases with you, eh?" August says, "Look, Papa, upper, lower, poor, rich, that always exists. It is only the importance of one places on that question that is decisive. To us, life is not chopped up into working hours and furnished with price charts. Rather, we believe in human existence as a whole. None of us regards making money as most important thing we want to serve. The individual is a corpuscle in the bloodstream of his people." That's nationalism for you. The Sun's comments are revealing, quote, "The class struggle is dying out. Papa's concern about the abuses of class power and class injustice is facilely dismissed as just a frame of mind with no objective reality. It is even falsely equated with a crass concern for money. Quote, none of us regard making money as important. Presumably, matters of wealth are to be left to those who actually have it. We have something better," August is saying, "a totalistic, monistic experience as a people, all of us, rich and poor, working together for some greater glory. Conveniently overlooked is how the glorious sacrifices are borne by the poor for the benefit of the rich." The position enunciated in that play and in other Nazi propaganda does not reveal an indifference to class. Quite the contrary, it represents a keen awareness of class interest, a well-engineered effort to mask and mute the strong class consciousness that existed among workers in Germany. In the crafty denial, we often find the hidden admission. Patriarchy and Pseudo-Revolution. Fascism's national chauvinism, racism, sexism, and patriarchal values also served a conservative class interest. Fascist doctrine, especially the Nazi variety, makes an explicit commitment to racial supremacy. Human attributes, including class status, are said to be inherited through blood. One's position in the social structure is taken as a measure of one's innate nature. Genetics and biology are marshaled to justify the existing class structure, not unlike what academic racists today are doing with their quote-unquote bell curve theories and warmed-over eugenics claptrap. Along with race and class inequality, fascism supports homophobia and sexual inequality. Among Nazism's earliest victims were a group of Nazi homosexuals, leaders of the SA stormtroopers. When complaints about the openly homosexual behavior of the SA leader Ernst Röhm and some of his brown-shirted stormtroopers continued to reach Hitler after he seized power, he issued an official statement contending that the issue belonged, quote, purely to the private domain, and that an SA officer's private life cannot be an object of scrutiny unless it conflicts with basic principles of National Socialist ideology. The paramilitary SA had been used to win the battle of the streets against trade unionists and the Reds. The stormtroopers acted as a pseudo-revolutionary force that appealed to mass grievances with a rhetorical condemnation of financial capital. When SA membership skyrocketed to 3 million in 1933, this was too discomforting to the industrial barons and the military patricians. SA street brawlers who denounced the bourgeois decadence and called for sharing the wealth and completing the quote-unquote Nazi revolution would have to be dealt with. Having used the SA to take state power, Hitler then used the same state power to neutralize the SA. Now suddenly Rome's homosexuality did not conflict with the National Socialist ideology, or did conflict with the National Socialist ideology. In truth, the SA had to be decapitated, not just because its leaders were homosexual, though that was the reason given, but because it threatened to turn into a serious problem. Rome and about 300 other SA members were executed, not all of whom were gay. Among the victims was veteran Nazi propagandist Gregor Strasser, who was suspected of leftist leanings. Of course, many Nazis were virulently homophobic. One of the most powerful of all, SS leader Heinrich Himmler, saw homosexuals as a threat to German manhood and the moral fiber of Teutonic peoples, for a quote-unquote homosexual sissy would not procreate or make a good soldier. Himmler's homophobia and sexism came together when he announced, quote, if a man just looks at a girl in America, he can be forced to marry her or pay damages. Therefore, men protect themselves in the USA by turning to homosexuals. Women in the USA are like battle axes. They hack away at the males, end quote. Thus spoke one of the great minds of Nazism. In time, Himmler succeeded in extending the oppression of gays beyond the SA leadership. Thousands of gay civilians perished in the SS concentration camps. In societies throughout the ages, if able to find the opportunity, women have attempted to limit the number of children they bear. This poses a potential problem for a fascist patriarchy that needs vast numbers of soldiers and armaments workers. Women are less able to assert their procreative rights if kept subservient and dependent, so fascist ideology extolled patriarchal authority. Every man must be a husband, a father, and a soldier, Il Duce said. Women's greatest calling was to cultivate her domestic virtues, devotedly tending to the needs of her family while bearing as many offspring for the state as she could. Patriarchal ideology was linked to a conservative class ideology that saw all forms of social equality as a threat to hierarchical control and privilege. The patriarchy buttressed the plutocracy. If women get out of line, what will happen to the family? And if the family goes, the entire social structure is threatened. What then will happen to the state and to the dominant class's authority, privileges, and wealth? The fascists were big on what today is called quote-unquote family values, though most of the top Nazi leaders could hardly be described as devoted family men. In Nazi Germany, racism and anti-Semitism served to misdirect legitimate grievances toward convenient scapegoats. Anti-Semitic propaganda was cleverly tailored to appeal to different audiences. Super patriots were told that the Jew was an alien internationalist. Unemployed workers were told that their nemesis was the Jewish capitalist and Jewish banker. For debtor farmers, it was the Jewish usurer. For the middle class, it was the Jewish union leader or the Jewish communist. Here again, we have a consciously rational use of irrational images. The Nazis might have been crazy, but they were not stupid. What distinguishes fascism from ordinary right-wing patriarchal autocracies is the way it attempts to cultivate a revolutionary aura. Fascism offers a beguiling mix of revolutionary-sounding mass appeals and reactionary class politics. The Nazi Party's full name was the National Socialist German Workers' Party, a left-sounding name. As already noted, the SA stormtroopers had a militant share-the-wealth strain in their ranks that was suppressed by Hitler after he took state power. Both the Italian fascists and the Nazis made a conscious effort to steal the left's thunder. There were mass mobilizations, youth organizations, work brigades, rallies, parades, banners, symbols, and slogans. There was much talk about a quote-unquote Nazi revolution that would revitalize society, sweeping away the old order and building the new. For this reason, mainstream writers feel free to treat fascism and communism as totalitarian twins. It is a case of reducing essence to the form. The similarity in form is taken as a reason enough to blur the vast difference in actual class content. Writers like A. James Gregor and William Ebenstein, countless Western political leaders, and others who have supposedly are on the democratic left, regularly lump fascism with communism. Thus, Noam Chomsky claims, quote, "The rise of corporations was in fact a manifestation of the same phenomena that led to fascism and Bolshevism, which sprang out of the same totalitarian soil." But in the Italy and Germany of that day, most workers and peasants made a firm distinction between fascism and communism, as did industrialists and bankers who supported fascism out of fear and hatred of communism, a judgment based largely on class realities. Years ago, I used to say that fascism never succeeded in solving the irrational contradictions of capitalism. Today I am of the opinion that it did accomplish that goal, but only for the capitalists, not for the populace. Fascism never intended to offer a social solution that would serve the general populace, only a reactionary one, forcing all the burdens and losses onto the working public. Divested of its ideological and organizational paraphernalia, fascism is nothing more than a final solution to the class struggle, the totalistic submergence and exploitation of democratic forces for the benefit and the profit of higher financial circles. Fascism is a false revolution. It cultivates the appearance of popular politics and a revolutionary aura without suffering a genuine revolutionary class content. It propagates a quote-unquote new order while serving the same old moneyed interests. Its leaders are not guilty of confusion but of deception. That they work hard to mislead the public does not mean that they themselves are misled. Friendly to fascism. One of the things conveniently overlooked by mainstream writers is the way Western capitalist states have cooperated with fascism. In his collaborationist efforts, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain was positively cozy with the Nazis. He and many of his class saw Hitler as a bulwark against communism in Germany, and Nazi Germany as a bulwark against communism in Europe. After World War II, the Western capitalist allies did little to eradicate fascism from Italy or Germany, except for putting some of the top leaders on trial at Nuremberg. By 1947, German conservatives began to depict the Nuremberg prosecutors as dupes of the Jews and communists. In Italy, the strong partisan movement that had waged armed struggle against fascism was soon treated as suspect and unpatriotic. Within a year after the war, almost all Italian fascists were released from prison, while hundreds of communists and other leftist partisans who had been fighting the Nazi occupation were jailed. History was turned on its head, transforming the Blackshirts into victims and the Reds into criminals. Allied authorities assisted in these measures. Under the protection of U.S. occupation authorities, the police, courts, military, security agencies, and bureaucracy remained largely staffed by those who had served the former fascist regimes or by their ideological recruits, as is true to this day. The perpetrators of the Holocaust murdered 6 million Jews, 500,000 gypsies, thousands of homosexuals, several million Ukrainians, Russians, Poles, and others, and got away with it, in good part because the very people who were supposed to investigate these crimes were themselves complicit. In comparison, when the communists took over East Germany, they removed some 80% of the judges, teachers, and officials for their Nazi collaboration. They imprisoned thousands, and they executed 600 Nazi party leaders for their war crimes. They would have shot more of the war criminals had not so many fled to the protective embrace of the West. What happened to the U.S. businesses that collaborated with fascism? The Rockefeller family's Chase National Bank used its Paris office in Vichy, France, to help launder German money to facilitate Nazi international trade during the war, and did so with complete impunity. Corporations like DuPont, Ford, GM, and ITT owned factories in enemy countries that produced fuel, tanks, and planes that wreaked havoc on Allied forces. After the war, instead of being prosecuted for treason, ITT collected $27 million from the U.S. government for war damages inflicted on its German plants by Allied bombings. GM collected $33 million. Pilots were given instructions not to hit factories in Germany that were owned by U.S. firms. Thus, Cologne was almost leveled by Allied bombing, but its Ford plant, providing military equipment for the Nazi army, was untouched. Indeed, German civilians began using the plant as an air raid shelter. For decades, U.S. leaders have done their part in keeping Italian fascism alive. From 1945 to 1975, U.S. government agencies gave an estimated $75 million to right-wing organizations in Italy, including some with close ties to the neo-fascist Movimento Sociale Italiano, MSI. In 1975, then-Secretary of State Henry Kissinger met with MSI leader Giorgio Almirante in Washington to discuss what, quote, alternatives might be considered should the Italian communists win the elections and take control of the government. Hundreds of Nazi war criminals found a haven in the United States, either living in comfortable anonymity or actively employed by U.S. intelligence agencies during the Cold War and otherwise enjoying the protection of high-placed individuals. Like I said, look up Operation Paperclip. Just look it up, do some reading. It's pretty interesting. I digress. Some of them found their way into the Republican presidential campaign committees of Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George Bush. In Italy, from 1969 to 1974, high-ranking elements in Italian military intelligence and civilian intelligence agencies, members of P2, a secret lodge of upper-class reactionaries, pro-fascist Vatican officials, and top military brass, and Gladio, a NATO-inspired anti-communist mercenary force, embarked upon a concerted campaign of terror and sabotage known as the, quote, strategy of tension. Other participants included a secret neo-fascist group called the Ordine Nuovo, NATO officials, members of the Carabinieri Mafia bosses, 30 generals, 8 admirals, and influential Freemasons like Licio Gelli, a fascist war criminal recruited by the U.S. intelligence in 1944. The terrorism was aided and abetted by the international security apparatus, including the CIA. In 1995, the CIA refused to cooperate with an Italian paramilitary commission investigating the strategy of tension. The terrorist conspirators carried out a series of kidnappings, assassinations, and bombing massacres, including the explosion that killed 85 people and injured some 200 more, many seriously, in the Bologna train station in August 1980. As subsequent judicial investigations concluded, the strategy of tension was not a simple product of neo-fascism, but a consequence of a larger campaign conducted by state security forces against the growing popularity of the democratic paramilitary left. The objective was to, quote, combat by any means necessary the electoral gains of the Italian Communist Party, and create enough fear and terror in the population so as to undermine the multi-party social democracy and replace it with an authoritarian presidential republic, or in any case, a stronger and more stable executive. In the 1980s, scores of people were murdered in Germany, Belgium, and elsewhere in Europe, Western Europe, by extreme rightists in the service of state security agencies. These acts of terrorism went mostly unreported in the U.S. corporate-owned media. As with the earlier strategy of tension in Italy, the attacks were designed to create enough popular fear and uncertainty so as to undermine the existing social democracies. Authorities in these Western European countries and the United States have done little to expose neo-Nazi networks. As the whiffs of fascism develop into an undeniable stench, we are reminded that Hitler's progeny are still with us and that they have dangerous links with each other and within the security agencies of various Western capitalist nations. In Italy, in 1994, the national elections were won by the National Alliance, a broadened version of the neo-fascist MSI, in coalition with the League of Northern Separatists and Forza Italia, a quasi-fascist movement headed by industrialists and media tycoon Silvio Berlusconi. The National Alliance played on resentments regarding unemployment, taxes, and immigration. It called for a single tax rate for rich and poor alike, school vouchers, and a stripping away of the social benefits and the privatization of most services. The Italian neo-fascists were learning from the U.S. reactionaries how to achieve fascism's class goals within the confines of quasi-democratic forms. Use an upbeat, Reagan-esque optimism, replace the jackbooted militarists with media-hyped crowd-pleasers, convince people that government is the enemy, especially its social service sector, while strengthening the repressive capacities of the state, instigate racist hostility and antagonisms between the resident population and immigrants, preach the mythical virtues of the free market, and pursue tax and spending measures that redistribute income upward. Conservatives in the Western nations utilize diluted forms of the fascist mass appeal. In the USA, they propagate populist-sounding appeals to the quote-unquote ordinary middle American, while quietly pressing for measures that serve the interest of the wealthiest individuals and corporations. In 1996, right-wing Speaker of the House of Representatives Newt Gingrich, while proffering a new rollback agenda that supposedly would revitalize all of society, announced, quote, "I am a genuine revolutionary." Whether in Italy, Germany, the United States, or any other country, when the right offers a new revolution or new order, it is in the service of the same old moneyed interests, leading down that well-trodden road of reaction and repression that so many third-world countries have been forced to take, the road those at the top want us all to travel. So the next chapter is called Let Us Now Praise Revolution. I hope you guys are enjoying it so far. I really am as well. Again, thank you for recommending it to me. We will start this next chapter in the next couple of days. I'm off tomorrow, but I'm going to be busy most of the day. Hope you guys have a happy Easter, and keep fighting that good fight out there. I'll talk to you later.